Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you. Aiden, a special shout out and thank you to you for the personal outreach and the staying in touch that we have been able to do over these last several years. Aiden and I crossed paths many times in my past life, working on innovation and the ag bioscience economy in the Midwest of the United States. And it's something that I've realized by moving halfway across the world to Rome and being in the Food and Agriculture Organization, navigating so many complicated global topics, I have lost touch with a lot of people who were a part of some of my past adventures. And so Aiden, it's really terrific for you to have made the outreach and made the reconnect. I'm very happy about that. And it's also, you heard the reference to Purdue, but boiler up to all of the Boilermakers in the room. I'm a proud graduate of the Ag Economics Master's program there. And it's nice to see so many of the great Purdue alumni, students, and others who are here as a part of IFAMA. So I am going to do a little bit of a disclaimer and take the liberty of being one of the keynotes, which is while in parts of my talk I will touch on resilient and sustainable agri-food systems and markets, I'm taking the liberty, given yesterday's discussions, and I think some of the dynamics and the issues that are frankly facing the world that maybe you have some questions about, maybe you have some concerns about. It's definitely a time, I agree with Aiden's opening speech, for optimism, but there are a lot of concerning issues, trends, and dynamics right now that I want to make sure that all of you in this room, regardless of your role, whether you're a student, whether you're a policymaker, you're a researcher, you're a business person, that you think about these dynamics that are maybe more global in context, because they do have an impact on your work, on the future of market opportunities for whether it's Brazilian agriculture, U.S. agriculture, or any other part of maybe the more developed food and agricultural systems. So I hope you'll accommodate me with that approach, and we'll get through, I think, some of our views on what we're facing at the moment. So I have to start with the state of food security and nutrition in the world. And this, unfortunately, is not the part of the talk that gives you a lot of optimism. You may know that as a part of the United Nations, our North Star is the 2030 Development Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. And FAO is responsible for and contributes to at least 3 of those, with a lot of other touch points across all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. But our mission is to make sure that there is a world free from hunger, free from poverty, and that we work as best we can to reduce inequalities. So if you simply read any issue, latest issue of The Economist, a local or regional business paper, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, I think really, unfortunately, all we're hearing about these days are the continued growth of inequality, concerning levels of poverty, and for this audience, I really want you to focus on food security. And for those of you, interestingly, that we're having this conversation in Brazil, there's so much attention on ensuring that there are people taken out of poverty, taken out of hunger and malnutrition here. This is something that I wish would frankly be taken up by so many other countries in the world. But if I don't bring all of the data and the statistics that FAO is so well known for. I want to just kind of give you some highlights on trends. But global hunger is remaining stubbornly high. We were making progress in the mid-2010 to 2015. Certainly when COVID arrives, we lose ground, and now, unfortunately, we aren't seeming to get our ground back. We are also in a position, very importantly, while we talk about availability of food, accessibility of food, the other challenge is that most people in the world, 3 billion people on this planet, don't have access to a healthy, nutritious diet. And this, I think, is something that oftentimes gets overlooked when we think simply about quantities of food that are available to people in the world. This is a moment in time where we have to also prioritize the quality of those foods and the diets that they have. So again, we are off track. The Secretary General of the United Nations no longer talks about really sort of recommitting to the Sustainable Development Goals. We talk about rescuing them. The Sustainable Development Goal target is 2030. I will tell you, is probably a bit of a pragmatist in the UN system, maybe less of an idealist personally, that I would imagine we'll have to admit at some point as the system that we aren't reaching these 17 goals. And what happens then? We're only a few years away from needing to reconsider what is an incredibly large global agenda for all of these aspirational targets. Probably one of two things. We either have a new Secretary General who comes in and wants to put her or his personal mark and set, a new course for the next 10 to 15 years. Or what can often happen is you set a new deadline. You push the timeline out, you look to 2040, you look to 2050. So we'll see what continues to come in that way. But again, agri-food systems, essentially, you know all this, we talked about some of these trends yesterday. This was a part of recognizing, and I think what I've noticed is that in many ways, the food and agricultural sector is really, in our space at least, stepping in and owning some of these contributing forces and actions that are impacting the world around us. The contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, the concerning issues of biodiversity loss, water scarcity, that fact that agriculture uses 70% of the world's freshwater withdrawals. And if there is a contribution to pollution, marine pollution, if we look at fisheries and aquaculture and the oceans.
This is coming from land, and it has, agriculture has an impact. But this is where, again, the points that have been raised before, I think we recognize that this is a moment in time where agriculture is leaning in and demonstrating that it has great solutions to offer. I'll come back to technology and innovation in a moment. Now, I want to pivot, and I want to share a little bit with you about a very important part of, admittedly, my personal portfolio in FAO. It was referenced that I oversee our emergencies and resilience work, and I want to dive into that just a little bit more deeply with you, because when I am here in a place like Brazil, and I see the incredible productivity, profitability, sustainability gains that are coming in agriculture, so much of it driven by technology and innovation. I come from a family farm in the Midwest of the United States, in the state of Indiana, similar investments in innovation and technology. So believe me, I know it very personally. My portfolio in working on emergencies and resilience means that I'm responsible for FAO's programs in countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Gaza, Ukraine, Haiti, South Sudan, Sudan. I've traveled to many of these countries, and I can tell you, and this is why I've sort of chosen to focus a little bit on this message today, is that I need audiences and leaders and innovators and decision makers and young people, young professionals like all of you. I can't see many of you, but I know you're in the audience. I need you to understand and be mindful of the circumstances and the needs and the opportunities for further support for agriculturalists, for farmers, for rural people in these particular settings, because we have a great risk ahead of us of creating an even deeper divide within an agricultural sector globally if we don't somehow bring more attention to this. So when we look at a food crisis, when we look at levels of acute food insecurity in countries around the world, we see three primary drivers. The first is conflict, and this was not the case about 3 or 4 years ago. The advent of the war in Ukraine, Gaza followed suit. If you follow developments in Africa, there are civil wars taking place in numerous countries and continued conflict that is breaking out in many of those countries. So conflict and war is now the single largest driver of hunger and food insecurity in the world. That's followed by climate change and weather extremes. I've been to countries in Africa where I have seen and witnessed 10 years of a protracted drought that within the very same year has historic flooding. The swings, the pendulum swings that are occurring, and it's not just in Africa. I think we all have to acknowledge that the climate crisis, the climate impacts that are being faced around the world are ubiquitous to all of us. It's a shared experience, whether it's happening here in Brazil or it's happening in a number of other difficult locations and countries. But economic downturns are the third largest driver to hunger and malnutrition. We have not dug ourselves out of the impacts from an economic perspective from the COVID pandemic. We have countries in Africa where food price inflation really continued to put increasing pressure on their food import bills and growing debt, national debt. All of the challenges that are there continue to drive and push more people into this situation. So this particular slide is probably my one and only with numbers and lines and bars, but I want to spend just a little bit of time on it because this is our measurement of acute food insecurity. And acute food insecurity is measured by 5 different classifications. So there's phase 1, which is sort of an emerging, concerning issue. There's phase 2, which is more kind of tipping point on the verge of going into extreme hunger. And then we have 3, 4, and 5. 3 is crisis, 4 is emergency, and 5 is catastrophe, which actually borderlines to famine. And currently we have one country in the world, Sudan, which is experiencing famine-like conditions. We are watching the situation in Gaza very closely right now. All 2.1 million people, the entire population of the Gaza region is in IPC 4, ready to move into the highest level of hunger and near starvation into IPC 5. So what you have on this chart is, I need you to sort of look at the red numbers at the bottom. That is these top 3 categories, IPC phase 3, 4, and 5. This is the worst of the worst experiences. These are people who are not able to get enough calories, enough sustenance to be satisfied in a given day. They are hungry every day, not able to secure the right kinds of food supplies that are needed for their families. So in 2024, 295 million people in 53 countries are experiencing this incredibly high level of hunger and food insecurity. Now here's the statistic that I want to have this room particularly take away because it's not on the chart. Our best estimates are that 75% of the 295 people are connected to agriculture in some way. So the people, the majority of the people who are the most vulnerable, the most in need, are farmers. They own a bit of land, they are based in small villages, they herd livestock, they might engage in fishing activities, they grow small amounts of backyard crops, vegetables, maybe a small number of herds of goats or sheep or maybe chicken flocks. It's not agriculture on the scale of what we have been talking about for the last few days, but it is a significant component of what's needed to help these individuals move out of this category of hunger and food insecurity. And this is the population that FAO spends the majority of our time trying to support. Now, yesterday, I think it was actually in Aidan's opening presentation, he had a very interesting graphic about the expenditures that have gone into public research and development as compared to the expenditures that have gone into food aid. Our angle on that particular topic is maybe not the comparison of R&D to food aid, but is very importantly the comparison in how much money worldwide is being spent on food aid for these 295 million people versus how much is being spent on emergency agriculture assistance. These are people with dignity, with agency. Any of you who come from the farming business, I can get very emotional about this, coming from a family farm myself. There is a sense of pride in being related to agriculture. You want to feed yourself. You want to feed your family. You want to feed your neighbors. You want to feed the world. And when you are the one who is suffering for the humanitarian community of the world, and God bless the United States of America and a lot of other countries who have for years put very significant investments into global humanitarian responses, we are creating a cycle of dependency. These are individuals who don't want to be sustained by food aid. They don't want bags of wheat flour and containers of vegetable oil. They want seeds. They want fertilizer. They want animal vaccines. They want animal feed. And these are the things that tie them to not only their background in agriculture, but that they know will let them continue to produce locally, will let them have perhaps a healthier and more nutritious diet when you can have milk for your children, when you can have some fresh fruits and vegetables that come from those packages of seeds and that support that's given. And I can tell you, this is one of the most difficult arguments to make in donor capitals, with support that we have from so many people. There is such a traditional mindset towards support going through food aid. And this is the space where I think, together with many of you who are here, we can take more, I think, opportunities, whether it's through basic innovation and basic technology, promoting this kind of support for farmers worldwide, standing in lockstep for farmers everywhere to say, this is the kind of support we need to give to lift up more opportunities for others in agriculture. So stepping back from sort of that dynamic, then at a more global scale for FAO, we have to have these global conversations about what does agri-food systems transformation really require. And I would say that we're at a moment in time where transformation is no longer a choice. It's a necessity. And I think it's happening. This is the part that's so inspiring for me. I have not been to Brazil in over 20 years. That was the last time I came to the country. So it's, again, real pleasure to be here in this particular moment of time. But I can tell you that even in Rome, with the Brazilian diplomats, the national government leaders, the industry leaders who come, I am seeing that happening here is this commitment and this recognition to an agri-food systems transformation. And what does that require? It's not just technology. It's not just private sector led. It's not just industry led. It's not just farmer driven. When you have to transform an agri-food system, remember it's a system now. I think it's fascinating that more and more around the world, we no longer really talk about an agribusiness sector or a food and agricultural economy. We talk about a food system. We talk about an agri-food system. And so that means that we have to somehow integrate science and innovation, but also, very importantly, governance and public policy, social policy, land tenure, right to food, food security, climate policy. All of these things are interwoven. But we also need to make sure that we have value chains that are not only efficient, but I think, as we've seen in the last several years, more resilient to shocks. There have been too many shocks in the system. We have a lot of discussions around supply chains, value chains, open, accessible markets. We've seen countries at different times in the last 5 to 10 years start taking very unilateral actions to keep products within their own borders, to limit the number of exports that are going into the market. These fundamental approaches to value chains and markets are critical. and obviously new and stronger partnerships between and among all of us. So again, what does that really mean? I've said already that these systems need to be able to be more anticipatory. They need to be more forward-looking than we've been in the past, but they also need some resiliency built into them. They need to be able to recover more quickly. And we need to also be thinking, I think, more forward-looking about ways that we adapt and transform food systems in the face of what may be longer-term risks, and whether those are continuing to be issues of conflict, climate, or other economic concerns that are coming our way. This will be, I think, a very important space for us in the future. Markets and trade volatility are always front of mind for us. Experiences that we've all had in terms of market dynamics and shifts as a result of the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, what that meant for different changed trends in production of commodities, production of inputs. All of these things are now experiences that we have to collectively try to anticipate to ensure that national governments and national agricultural economies and systems, I think, are better protected and insulated. So let me just say a little bit about FAO. I want to pivot here now as I close to a little bit more about us and what we do, I think, in support of these dynamics. And I hope maybe that I can also say that we can do maybe a little more closely in alignment with many of you who are here. We are a specialized technical agency of the United Nations. We are celebrating our 80th anniversary this year, and in fact, just sort of a fun fact for those of you interested in the United Nations maybe, FAO was actually created 2 weeks before the formal UN charter that created the General Assembly was signed. And so this was a US, UK, Canada, and a few other countries coming out of the Great War, realizing that we needed collectively as the global leaders to focus on ensuring that we understood the dynamics of hunger and food security in the world. And that was the start of FAO. We are housed in Rome, Italy. We started in Washington, D.C. At that time in the 1940s, moved to Rome in 1951, and have been there ever since. We are one of 3 food agencies of the UN housed in Rome. The World Food Program is also there with us, and an International Fund for Agricultural Development. FAO has 16,000 people in our organization. We are in 140 plus countries around the world, but we also, very importantly, much like the UN General Assembly, have 194 members. And we operate by consensus as best we can. And I think you can appreciate that in today's modern world, consensus among 194 countries is almost impossible. But we try. And I can personally tell you, coming from with a private sector background myself and having experiences that are outside of a big sort of institutional, bureaucratic type of system, I get quite frustrated on many days at how slow we sometimes move to take action, to move issues forward. But I will also share with you my personal view that I think the world more than ever right now needs an FAO and needs that place where 194 voices and points of view from around the world can come together to talk about many of the complicated, different perspectives on the future of agri-food systems. The right, the wrong, the different opinions on whether it's modern agricultural technologies, the future of gene editing, whether it's on what is sustainable agricultural production. Is that agroecology? Is that climate smart agriculture? Is that nature-based solutions? Is that the bioeconomy? Where does that fit into? And if these discussions happen outside of a body or an organization like ours, I think we miss the opportunity to collectively go back and work on those larger issues that I was sharing with you earlier. So innovation and systems transformation is at the heart of what we are really committing to work with many of you who are here in the audience on. And I know that so far in the meetings, the presentations thus far, there's been a lot of conversation about technological innovation. But we are very much messaging to the countries that we work on because, in fact, in some places, these countries that I've mentioned earlier, the opportunity for big strides in technological innovation are only going to come when a number of these countries figure out institutional innovation, figure out policy innovation, figure out financial innovation or social innovation. And so this system is something that I think we also have to be mindful of. And finally, I would also say at our very heart of what we do, we have to think about each and every one of those people most in need, most vulnerable that we have to support. So putting people at the center is something that I also want to leave all of you with. So in this current dynamic, we're realizing it's a complicated environment in the moment. There are a lot of funding cuts. There's a lot of changing geopolitical dynamics. And so for us, we are recognizing that there can no longer be a dependency on traditional donors who, in some cases, simply kept hitting the auto pay on their support to whether it was FAO or any of the other UN organizations. I do think that there became a bit of a dependency over these last many years. And so now new and different partnerships are needed more than ever, which is when I think about the structure, the composition of an organization like IFAMA, perfect opportunity for more engagement with many of you individually, but also I think with IFAMA overall. So last slide, the call to action. I again think, and you all know it from the conversation and the structure of the meetings this week, that sustainability is not optional and it is essential for food security and nutrition. There is an urgency right now, given the dynamics, the trends, the state of the world, but admittedly, in this particular moment, geopolitics are redefining everything for an organization like us. I have spent the last 5 months, while I've got a lot of responsibilities and a lot of things to keep track of, the majority of my time since January 24th, when President Trump signed an executive order to eliminate U.S. assistance for foreign development, foreign support, has significantly affected us. The United States has already pulled out of at least 2 or 3 other UN organizations. We and many of the other UN entities are currently under a review by the U.S. State Department, and we're told that by August or September, we will each receive a scorecard. I'm guessing maybe a 1 to 10 ranking, and if you don't hit a 7 out of 10, it's very likely that the United States may walk away from your organization. And that, I can tell you, would be a death knell to the support and the kind of work that we are trying to do with so many of the people and the constituencies that I described. And this is putting the future of multilateralism at great risk. And again, I hope that maybe through my comments, I hope you recognize I'm a pretty pragmatic, pretty realistic, pretty eyes wide open person. And I can tell you, I will be one that says, does the UN system need to reform itself? Does it need to be more efficient? Does it need to work differently? Does it need to be more mindful of how it uses its resources? Absolutely. And so this is a moment where FAO has, maybe unlike some of our other peers in the system who have, really just been incredibly frustrated that the US and other countries are walking away, and there's such a moral defensiveness to that. We've chosen to take an approach of realizing that, very frankly, this may be our new reality. Because I'll tell you, I also am responsible for all of our fundraising in the organization, which means that after I go somewhere like Afghanistan or Somalia, I have to go to London, I have to go to Tokyo, I have to go to Oslo, I have to go to Washington, and try to keep generating support for the work that we do in these places. And it is getting harder and harder in almost every one of these capitals to find the kind of support and the kind of will to continue to prioritize these global requirements. I have not talked about taxpayers in the 5 years that I have been in our organization as I have in the last 5 months. Because the mindset now at a national level is, for every dollar, Beth, that I give to the Food and Agriculture Organization, how does that help my farmer? How does that help my consumer? How does that help my economy? And how does that help my taxpayer? Because the budget that, Beth, ultimately goes to you and your counterparts in the United Nations is coming from a taxpayer in the state of Indiana, in the state of Mato Grosso, in the state of, it's linking itself back. And I tell you this because this is transformational right now in terms of institutional reform that is going to come. And it really is, I think, going to change the way that an institution like FAO has to work alongside so many of you, may have to let go of some of our functions, may have to reprioritize the work that we do, may have to separate many of our staff, may have to cut back budgets, may have to make some very hard choices about what we do and what we do not. And so as we work through this particular time, what I just want to close with is, I think, back to my point about partnerships. We need to have more open dialogue, more exchange with those of you who are here, with our other partners, to say together, what is it that we can each contribute? Because right now, I hope you feel the same, that this is a moment where we need to ensure that we don't continue to widen the divides that already exist, that we maybe don't speak always about humanitarian priorities, but we talk about the importance of opening up markets, that we talk about the opportunities to elevate people. And when we do that, and we can bring, I think, better solutions to the table, I do think that we have an opportunity, optimistically, to create a much better world, not just for those of us sitting in this room and participating in an amazing transformation of food and agriculture here in this country and elsewhere, but in all of these places around the world. And this is my call to action to so many of you who I think have agriculture in your DNA and have agriculture in your heart, is that we need to lock arms, and we need to ensure that we build a better world for everyone who is here on this planet with us. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I hope I get invited back to future IFAMA meetings. It's been an absolute pleasure, and very, very much hope that we'll be able to find ways that we can do more with each of you. Thank you.